Paul Runyan was one of the best players of his time, and he's one of the greatest teachers of all time. He turned professional in 1930 and played with Nelson and Snead and Jones. He was still winning titles 30 years later. Meet Paul Runyan tonight on Golf Talk Live. Welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm Peter Kessler. Spring is here, flowers are blooming, and every dream seems possible because this is the beginning of Masters Week. When the first Masters was held 62 years ago, the cast of characters included names like Sarazen and Hagen and Craig Wood and Kai Laffoon and tonight's guest, Paul Runyan. He played in that first Masters in 1934 when even the retired Bobby Jones competed. Even though he hadn't played competitive golf since 1930, Jones was still so highly regarded that he was the co-favorite in the event, along with the best player of 1934, Paul Runyan, and both teed off at 6-1 odds. While Jones won the crowds, Runyan almost won the title, finishing 2 behind the first Masters winner, Horton Smith. And with regard to who's the best player at age 26, Ernie Els or Phil Mickelson, let's ask the guy who won more tournaments by that age than anyone else in the history of the tour, Paul Runyan. Paul Runyan was born in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and played golf and caddied despite his father's sense that golf was a frivolity. Soon, he was bringing home enough money to cause his father to reconsider. In the 1920s, he recognized that his small size dictated that he would be a shortish hitter, and he began to practice and work on his short game. He began to win immediately after turning pro in 1930, the year of Bobby Jones's Grand Slam. Over the next 11 years, he won 28 titles against the best in the business, including the 1934 and 38 PGA Championships. When he left the tour in the early 40s, he began a teaching career that continues today. He's recognized as the father of the modern short game, and his theories and techniques are as valid and imitated today as they were 60 years ago when he was slaying the giants of the game. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's nice to be with you.
It's a great, great honor to have you here. When you were a little boy, I guess one of the nicest things that ever happened to you was when your family moved from one part of Hot Springs to another, to a dairy farm right across the street almost from a golf course, right?
So close so that my mother could call me home for the milking from the caddy pen without having to run over. It was only about 300 yards.
Now, the milking, now is that the same milking stool that your dad once hit you in the head with when you were a kid?
I can't be sure it was one, but it was one.
What had you done to deserve that?
I had, instead of running around and coming in the proper door of the place, my father was milking a cow right under the window that I jumped up into the window to crawl in, and the cow dumped the bucket of milk over, and my father was incensed. For a week or so, I could get away with murder.
Now, he was a pretty stern guy, wasn't he? He didn't care for golf very much.
He thought it was a very decadent thing for people to be doing, and he forbade me to go to the course on many occasions. As a matter of fact, punished me a couple of times.
But you started to bring home fairly reasonable money. Did that change his mind a little?
If $60 or $65 a week for a 12-year-old to be bringing home when he was only earning maybe $40 or $50 a week with his dairy, and I was giving my mother $25 a week and then still having more spending money than any rich kid in Hot Springs, yes, my father soon took a different outlook.
Well, no wonder he would get mad at you easily. Any kid who was out earning his dad is going to incur that a little bit.
I suspect so.
When, in the 1920s, you won your state open 4 times.
Not in, Yes, in the late 1920s. I won the last time in April before I went to work for Craig Wood, but I did win 4 times before I was 21.
It's funny, Craig Wood, and we'll get a chance to talk about him tonight, but he was a little bit like the Greg Norman of his time in a way. He lost a lot of major championships at the last moment that he ought to have otherwise perhaps won before he went on to be a particularly wonderful player in terms of his record.
But then the golf gods recognized their fallacy, and he won several times the Masters and the Open. He was a fabulous, fabulous player.
What caused you to move from Arkansas and start to ply your craft on tour?
Well, I left Arkansas with no idea that I would ply my craft on tour. I'd had only very, very modest successes in playing the tour in California, Arizona, and Texas, where my little club and Concordia Club allowed me to go and compete. But during that period, I met Craig Wood, and Craig Wood had the facility of hiring good young people to represent him at all the clubs he had been before he hired me and afterward. And I went to work for him at Forest Hills Field Club in Bloomfield, New Jersey in 1930. I left Arkansas and stopped by Pinehurst, North Carolina, with the hopes of making my expenses going up. And the golf gods shined on me, and I won the North and South Open on my way from Arkansas to New Jersey. I left Arkansas a nobody and got to New Jersey a somebody and out of debt as well.
What was your impression for a farm boy from the Midwest, first seeing New York in the roaring 20s or really the beginning of the 30s when you got there? What was that like?
I thought I was in a new world.
And you were?
Yes.
Did you go see Babe Ruth play baseball?
No, I didn't have to do that. I saw him play golf in Arkansas. Well, Arkansas was frequented by many of the great baseball players on their way to spring training. They came by Hot Springs to take those thermal baths, and I got to know Babe Ruth a little more than casually. Babe Ruth, Goose Goslin, Sam Rice, Walter Johnson, Carl Mays, to name a few.
All the great Yankees. Very quickly, tell me what kind of a guy Ruth was.
What? Wait a minute.
What kind of fellow was Babe?
Well, he was the Walter Hagen of baseball, completely irresponsible, fabulous as in his craft, but not a very good trainer. Ruth was there to take off weight, and they'd fit him in that rubber suit and a couple of shirts on top of it, send him out to play 36 holes and lose 6 or 8 pounds. The next morning he'd have it back on again, in spite of the fact they watched his food like a hawk, but he still got it somehow.
He snuck out in the middle of the night, right?
However.
We're going to take a short break, Paul. We will be right back with Paul Runyan. If you'd like to talk to him, our number is 1-800-842-9987. Stay with us. Although the early 1930s was marked by the Great Depression in the United States, it was a time of growth for the professional golf tour. But purses were small and times were hard. Most players' primary income came from working as club pros. They played on tour simply for the love of the game. In turn, a genuine feeling of camaraderie developed on the PGA Tour. Players traveled together and cared for one another like family. Strong bonds formed, perhaps none stronger than the one between Paul Runyan and Harry Lighthorse Cooper.
Well, I played more golf with Paul and with probably than any other man in the game. Paul and I were great friends and still are. And I think he's a hell of a fine young man. Not a young man, I mean he's a fine young old man.
Now, of course, Harry's still up at Westchester Country Club, near where you used to work at Metropolis. He had kind of a John Daly swing, didn't he? Very long, and surprising that he didn't win maybe as often as he should have.
When he first came to Hot Springs, Arkansas, he had a swing exactly the length of John Daly's. but he soon learned that that wasn't going to win very often because he was a little on the wild side. And I don't know who influenced him more than his own acumen, but he shortened it, made it more compact, and became one of the three finest shot makers of that period or any period on earth. If Harry Cooper had been as good a competitor as Paul Runyan, he'd have won everything. Because when we played for our dollar Nassaus, he won at least 3 times out of 5, and maybe even more frequently than that. But when the bell rang, Cooper didn't play the same. He somehow had a feeling that everything was against him instead of everything with him. But he still had a fabulous record and is one of the prince among men. He was not very popular with his cohorts on the golf course, but I rate Cooper as one of the finest human beings I've ever met. And certainly with a golf club in his hand, he's one of the 10 finest the world's ever known if his competitive disposition had matched his skills.
Interesting. You know, now, Hagen was kind of the opposite, right? Hagen's game tee to green wasn't nearly as strong as Harry's, but yet he believed he was going to win, and he did.
Well, I don't quite look at it that way. There was a comparison. Cooper was a more finished shot maker than Hagen, but Hagen was a more dashish shot maker than Cooper. And then what you've just alluded to was the difference between the two great players.
What kind of a fellow was Hagen off of the golf course?
The Babe Ruth of golf. He was irresponsible in many ways, did more for professional golfers than anybody on earth. He took us out of his Servile class and put us in a much more responsible and high pedestal position. He's the first one to actually have golf shoes. We had street shoes with a spike in the toe of it. We played in our oldest clothes. He wore silk shirts, tab collars, cuffs, two-tone shoes, went out dressed to play. He had a flair that was unknown to us before his appearances.
Let's talk about another great of the time and of all time, Bobby Jones.
Bobby Jones was, in my opinion, the finest golfer that ever lived until he was superseded by Ben Hogan, who in turn was superseded by Nicklaus. Bobby Jones also was the finest fairway wood player I've ever seen. I had a fairly good reputation as a fairway wood player, but I don't believe I had anything like the skill with the fairway woods that did Bobby Jones. And with a driver, he was one of the 3 finest drivers I've ever seen. I think Sam Snead best, Byron Nelson or Bobby Jones next, and whichever one was the next.
People, your contemporaries would say that to watch Jones swing in person was a little bit like watching or listening to poetry or watching great ballet. Did you feel that way about Jones's golf swing?
Certainly. He and Sam Snead and perhaps Donald Smith was the epitome of gracefulness with a golf club in their hands.
We're going to talk to Ken in Iowa now, Paul. Hello, Ken.
Yes, good evening.
How are you?
I'm fine this evening. What a privilege to talk to Mr. Runyan.
Thank
I have
you.
a couple quick questions here. First of all, I wondered who gave him his nickname, which professional maybe gave him his nickname, A Little Poison. And I also wondered if he'd comment maybe on the evolution of the putting stroke from a wristy type pop stroke to a shoulder stroke, maybe which one he preferred.
Where the name Little Poison is concerned, Larry Robinson of the World Telegraph here in New York gave me that moniker because in baseball there was Big Paul and Little, there's Paul Wainer was Little Poison of baseball, and since most of the big hitters in golf would rather play each other than play me, he named me the Little Poison of golf. As far as the putting techniques are concerned, I am still trying my best to achieve a better method of putting. And I've made 2 simple changes since I was a boy. I have not changed the positions of my hands on the club, excepting that instead of using a reverse overlap, which I did, about 10 years ago as a teaching professional, I said, why am I doing this when I want equal gripping strength? So I simply put all 8 fingers on the club with no fingers overlapping. About 2 or 2.5 years ago, again experimenting for a better method of striking the ball, I began to experiment with the hands separated. Because most of the good players in golf today are now using a one-levered technique. And the closer your hands are together, the more difficult it is to keep a cocking and an uncocking of the wrist out of the stroke at the change from the backward to the downward motion. I've gone as far as to separate them this much, in which case it's impossible to use a two-lever technique. But with that type of stroke, I had to move my arms so much to get enough leverage for some of the longer putts. I gave up on that and am now settled with the hands just barely separated about 1 inch, half an inch or an inch, for an ordinary putting, but in high winds a little farther. And that has made it next to impossible to use a two-lever technique. So the one-lever technique is desirable, and that's the 2 simple changes that I made since I, as a boy, did it with the reverse overlap, just because why I did it that way I have never known, unless Mr. Jack Vilas, who was the best amateur in Arkansas at that time, did it with that type of technique.
Harry Cooper was right. You are a young man. And later on in the show, we're going to give you a special treat as Paul demonstrates both his pitching and his putting techniques for you on our instructional set. We'll be right back with Paul Runyan. What do you do for an encore after winning 9 golf tournaments in one season? If you're Paul Runyan, you follow it up with 7 more victories the next year, including your first PGA Championship. Runyan's dominance in 1933 and 34 culminated in a victory over Craig Wood in the 1934 PGA Championship. After 36 pressure-packed holes, it would take 2 sudden death holes before the tenacious Runyan emerged victorious. Runyan went on to capture the 1934 Radix Trophy, later to be named the Barden Trophy, and became the PGA Tour's first official leading money winner. When you won in 1934 over Craig Wood in the finals, most of the members of Metropolis, with the club you were associated with in Westchester County, New York, had the pleasure of seeing some of that because the tournament was in upstate New York. That must have been a special thrill.
Especially so since Mr. Gerald Rosenberger, who was a member at Metropolis Country Club, had more to do with my successes than any other human being, with the possible exception of Jimmy Norton, my mentor, when I was serving my apprenticeship.
Tell me why.
Well, he just seemed to have his finger in every important thing I did in golf. He made it possible for me to make the winter tour. He was the instigator. He and 50 other members at Metropolis Country Club each put up their $100 to make the pot of $5,000, which would send me on the winter tour. The point was I was to mail all the winning checks back, and if there were profits, they were to be divided equally between me and the 50 members who had chipped in. Well, the point of it was the very first year there was a very small profit. They did not take their share of the profit. They gave it all to me and a check for $1,500 in addition. But during the playing of the PGA Championship at the Park Club, Mr. Edmund Waterman, who was the president of Metropolis when I went there and was still the president 14 years later when I left, he began to applaud Craig's bad shots. And we had to get him quieted down real quickly because that was not the proper thing to have been doing. However, the winning against Craig was a tremendous thrill, because to go extra holes and then have to face a player like Craig Wood on a 535-yard 5-par hole on the first playoff hole, I'm at a distinct disadvantage. His second shot stopped about 9 feet from the hole. From where we were down the fairway, it looked like it was a gimme. My second shot, of course, was 35, 40, 50 yards short of the green. But when it got up there, his was 9 feet away. I got my third one 18 inches away. He missed the 9-footer. I made the 18-inch one, and then the onus is on him. The next hole, I was the upper dog.
Craig Wood was an incredibly fine player, too, of the time. I mean, it wasn't just somebody you beat. I mean, Craig Wood was clearly in the top half dozen of great players of that time period, wasn't he?
He was probably the 4th best driver the world's ever known, and might be 3rd because he was considerably longer than Harry, but Harry was extremely consistent with his and long enough to be adequately good. Where Craig was concerned, he had so many bad breaks, just as Norman has in these modern times. The first bad break was not of any great consequence, excepting that he did permit me to play in the New Jersey State Open. Most assistants didn't have that wonderful opportunity. With 1 round to go, we were tied. He shot 69 the last round, but I shot 66, and I beat my own boss. And I'm sure I'm going to get fired. And instead, he gave me a raise. That's Craig Wood for you.
That's great stuff. Let's go ahead and talk to Tom. How are you, sir?
Hi. Yeah, I'm from Buffalo, New York, where Park Club is, and vacationing down in Myrtle Beach. And what I wanted to know, Paul, was how was that playoff? You know, was it tight, or it went 2 holes, I think, and maybe you could reminisce with us what happened.
Well, Tom, the reminiscing is relatively unnecessary, excepting that the first playoff hole was a 535-yard hole. And a light hitter in a sudden death playoff on a situation like that, it's really unfair because it's too short. He's at a great disadvantage on a hole of that kind. I was very fortunate to make a 4 to tie his 4. Then I won on the next extra hole, which was fair dinkum for either one of us. I think probably that finish caused the PGA to change their playoffs to 18-hole playoffs rather than sudden death playoffs. My winning at the Park Club in Buffalo, on the 50th anniversary of that tournament, they invited me back to be the guest speaker at one of their men's events. They threw me a curve. They were intending to make me an honorary life member of the Park Club, which they did at the 50th anniversary. So that's an added incentive for my having won in 1934.
When we come back, we will talk some more with Paul Runyan. We will take your calls, 1-800-842-9987.